BBC News at 1 with Sophie Rayworth.
The Vatican has announced the death of Pope Francis. He died this morning at the age of 88. This is the scene at the Vatican now, where crowds are gathering in St. Peter's Square. It was here 24 hours ago that the Pope was last seen in public as he blessed thousands of Easter worshippers. King Charles, who met Pope Francis just 2 weeks ago, said he had profoundly touched the lives of so many. Good afternoon. Pope Francis, the head of the Catholic Church, has died at the age of 88. The Vatican says he died at 7:35 this morning. In a statement, it said the Pope's entire life was dedicated to the service of the Lord and his Church, and that he taught people to live the values of the gospel with fidelity, courage, and universal love, especially towards the poorest and most marginalised. Well, this is the Vatican this afternoon. Mourners are gathering in St. Peter's Square to pay their respects to the Pope. He was already in his 70s when he was elected in 2013. He'd been suffering from ill health and was admitted to hospital in February for pneumonia in both lungs. He'd been discharged last month after 5 weeks of treatment for an infection. And he was last seen in public just yesterday, appearing on the balcony overlooking St. Peter's Square to wish Happy Easter to the thousands of worshippers who had gathered there to see him. Well, tributes from around the world are being paid to the Pope, who was the leader of more than 1 billion Catholics. We will be looking back at his life and hearing some of those tributes. And we'll be looking at what happens next as his successor is chosen. Our first report this afternoon is from our religious editor, Alim Makboul.
To the end, there for those he felt most connected with, greeting the masses on Easter Sunday, his last public act.
Cari fratelli e sorelle, buona Pasqua.
Always a pope devoted to his work, finding it difficult to rest even when told he had to. Recently meeting the king after his 5-week stay in hospital, and yesterday, the US Vice President. His surprise election in 2013 would mark a more radical break with the past than many expected. Jorge Bergoglio did have Italian roots, but was born in Argentina. While studying for priesthood, he worked briefly as a nightclub bouncer. While many fellow Jesuits were jailed and tortured during Argentina's military dictatorship, he rose to become Archbishop of Buenos Aires, some accusing him of forging too close a relationship with the regime. As Pope, he greeted his flock, having taken the name of a saint who championed the cause of the poor. Francis signalled that his pontificate would be rooted not in Rome, but in the lives of believers around the world, and especially those on the economic margins. His style was informal, even when conducting ceremonies, and his first act as Pope was to pay his own hotel bill. In his early gestures, like washing the feet of the elderly and prisoners, he showed desire for his priests to be closer to the disadvantaged. He spoke out for the protection of migrants and refugees, laying a wreath on the waters where so many died on their perilous journeys. He travelled widely, drawing energy from the crowds. In Brazil, 3 million gathered on Copacabana Beach. And in the Philippines, he broke records for the world's largest mass, as 6 million turned out to join him. He linked economic inequality to the environment. In a video launching a papal encyclical, he said climate change amounted to rich countries inflicting damage on poor ones.
The Pope of the Holy See!
In 2015, he became the first pope to address the US Congress.
I am most grateful for your invitation
telling the world's richest nation to take care of Mother Earth.
God bless America.
He apologized for the scandal of sexual abuse of children by priests. His words here spoken by a translator.
God weeps for the sexual abuse of children.
On a visit to Ireland, the first by a pope in almost 40 years, he apologised to victims at almost every event, but scandals continued to emerge. His papacy marks something of a change of tone on the subject of homosexuality, early on remarking, "Who am I to judge?" when talking about a gay bishop. But some progressives argue that in practical terms, the Vatican's stance and the Church's teachings have changed little. Even so, conservative Catholics viewed him with suspicion. But in some ways, he was as traditional as Pope John Paul II, whom he made a saint. And he had very conservative views on abortion, contraception, surrogacy, and gender reassignment. His style of papacy, though, couldn't have been more different to his immediate predecessor, Benedict XVI, whose funeral he presided over. Through the scores of cardinals from the developing world he appointed, he changed the complexion of the church hierarchy, consolidating a shift in the centre of gravity of Catholicism away from Europe, where it was in decline, toward Latin America, Asia and sub-Saharan Africa. In recent years, Pope Francis was beset by health issues, most noticeably affecting his mobility, but he found it hard to pare down his busy schedule.
Buona domenica a tutti.
He was, above all, a pastoral pope, a man of humility who preferred the fellowship of ordinary believers to the trappings of ecclesiastical status and power.
Alim Maqbool there. Well, let's go to the Vatican now. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes is there for us, and tell us about the reaction there this afternoon.
Well, Sophie, as news has started to spread across Rome this morning that the Pope had died, people have begun to come here to St. Peter's. People are streaming in now as we speak. There's obviously shock at the news and sadness. Some young people we've spoken to talked about how much he cared about young people, that he was a progressive person who cared about the poor and the young. There's tremendous sadness, obviously, from the Catholic faithful. Perhaps not a huge surprise. The Pope was very, very sick last month, and he was close to death a couple of times, we understand, in hospital. We thought he was recovering. I was actually here in the square yesterday when the Pope came out to do the Easter blessing on the balcony of St. Peter's behind me, and then drove around the square in his Pope-mobile. People were very excited to see him. We spoke to people yesterday who said, "We've been praying for him. This is a sign that he's getting better. We're so happy to see him." But he also looked extremely tired and very, very frail. You could see when he spoke yesterday, his voice was extremely thin. He was struggling to get the words out. And his doctors had advised him to take more rest. But Pope Francis, during the whole of his papacy, was absolutely committed to spending all of his time, or as much of his time as he could, with the faithful, with his flock, if you like. And I think it's very clear he wanted to be here yesterday, despite the fact it clearly took a heavy toll on him. And, you know, we've now got this news today that he passed away early this morning.
Rupert Wingfield-Hayes with the latest there from the Vatican. Thank you. Well, the Catholic community around the world is paying tribute to Pope Francis. The bells of Paris's Notre Dame Cathedral rang out 88 times for Pope Francis, and a service of remembrance has been held as people gathered to attend Easter Mass. When the cathedral reopened in December, Pope Francis said the rebirth of Notre Dame was a sign of renewal for the church in France. And these are the pictures inside Buenos Aires Metropolitan Cathedral, the city of Pope Francis's birth. Before becoming pontiff, he was the Archbishop of Buenos Aires for 15 years. His countrymen have praised him for the humility and simplicity with which he approached the role. King Charles and Queen Camilla were among the last to meet the Pope in person. Their state visit to the Vatican had been cancelled this month because of the Pope's ill health, but he was well enough to hold a private meeting with them. They are among many who have been paying their own tributes to the Pope since his death was announced this morning, as Joe Inwood now reports.
In St. Peter's Square, in the shadow of the balcony where just 24 hours before he had made what would turn out to be his last appearance, the news of the death of Pope Francis quickly spread. Even for those who had seen him speak, looking so frail, the news was no less shocking.
I was sort of really shocked because I was here yesterday at Mass and I saw the Pope and he looked just so fragile, you know.
I was just on the phone to my mother and she said you guys were so lucky to receive that last blessing for him. But also it was so difficult to see him in that state because he was always such a smiling Pope, such a happy Pope.
I find it very significant that the Pope has died during Easter or the Easter weekend. I'm from Argentina, the Pope is Argentinian, so, you know, it has quite a bit of significance for us.
In Jerusalem's old city, they marked his passing. In the Philippines, home to millions of Catholics, special mass was said for their spiritual leader. Prayers were said in Nigeria. In Jakarta, where there is a small but devout Catholic population. While in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, a land in the grip of violent uprising, people paused to pay their respects. Pope Francis was a leader who reached beyond the world's 1.2 billion Catholics. His death was quickly marked worldwide.
His was a papacy of firsts, the first pope to hail from the Americas, the first Jesuit pope, and the first to take the name of that great champion of the poor, St. Francis of Assisi. Pope Francis' compassion embraced all humanity, and today he will be mourned by Catholics and non-Catholics alike.
At France's recently reconstructed Notre Dame Cathedral, the bells rung for his passing as people gathered to pay their respects.
Throughout his pontificate, he's been at the side of the most vulnerable and fragile, with a great deal of humility and a very special sense of humanity in these times of war and brutality. And in this, he was faithful to a tradition that was dear to him.
While Sir Keir Starmer said Pope Francis was a pope for the poor, the downtrodden and the forgotten, he was close to the realities of human fragility, meeting Christians around the world facing war, famine, persecution and poverty. Yet he never lost hope of a better world. One of the last global leaders to see the Pope in person was King Charles, who said that he was deeply saddened by his death, adding that throughout his work and care for both people and planet, he profoundly touched the lives of so many. And at cathedrals all around the UK, people began to gather. In Westminster, preparations are underway for a special mass.
Why will he be remembered for you?
As a strong man with determined to change the world.
Shocked really, because when we saw him yesterday I thought he was getting a bit better. So I was really sad this morning when you heard that he's actually died.
Yeah, I think the whole Catholic community is going to be devastated, first of all, even though that we knew it, that his health has been quite in a balance for some time. But as a leader of the Catholic Church, it is a devastating news for all of us, definitely.
Cardinal Vincent Nichols said a voice for proclaiming the innate dignity of every human being, especially those who are poor or marginalised, is now silent. The legacy he leaves is one we must seek to carry forward and strengthen. Easter Monday Mass is always significant for Catholics, today more so than ever. Special services are being planned across the UK to mark the life and death of Pope Francis. Joe Inwood, BBC News.
Well, Argentina has just announced 7 days of national mourning. Argentina, of course, where Pope Francis was born. Mark Easton is here with me, and it's going to be a huge shock despite people knowing he was suffering from ill health. Look back now for us at his legacy.
He was a man, I think, who sought to embed radical change, to make his church less Roman and more Catholic, if you like, less focused on Europe and more on a diverse global congregation. He personally appointed almost 80% of the cardinals who will choose his predecessor. He wanted to bake in his vision of Catholicism, and he wants that to continue long after his death. But as anyone who's watched the movie Conclave will probably imagine, the politics and machinations of what happens next are likely to be convoluted. What I think we can say is that Pope Francis demanded that the Catholic Church become more humble, more focused on the poor and the dispossessed. He once said he wanted it to be a poor church for the poor. And that modest, that meek vision of Catholicism is perhaps the most powerful element of his legacy. I think he may go down in history as the Pope who changed the philosophy of the Vatican, the Christian thinking of the Catholic Church.
Mark Easton, thank you. Well, the death of Pope Francis will affect the more than 1 billion Catholics right around the world. We have correspondents in Europe, Africa, the Middle East. Let's start with Yolande Nell, who is in Bethlehem. Yolande.
Well, Palestinian Christians have been expressing their great sorrow about Pope Francis's death and remembering too his calls for peace in the Holy Land. Going back to his visit here back in 2014, he was on a stage right in the spot in Manger Square where I am at the moment, in front of the Nativity Church built on the spot where it's believed that Jesus was born. There was a big open air mass here. More recently too, the Pope had been increasingly vocal in criticism of Israel's military offensive in Gaza, calling the situation there dramatic and deplorable. The mayor of Bethlehem, Anton Salman, spoke to me a short time ago. He said that the death of Pope Francis was a great loss for the Palestinian people. He said that he was one of the few leaders in the world who were supporting Palestinian rights, and he hoped that the next Pope would be taking up strong positions too. Like a lot of people I've spoken to around the square, he remembered as well how the Pope would call regularly to a priest in Gaza City and speak to some of the hundreds of the Gazan Christians who have been sheltering in the Holy Family Catholic Church there, really seeing that as a gesture of great personal support and solidarity.
Yolande, thank you. Well, let's go to Spain now. Guy Hedgecoe is in Madrid, and 3 days of mourning have been announced in Spain.
Yes, that's right. I mean, any pope is a significant figure here in Spain. It is, of course, a Catholic country, and that was certainly the case with Pope Francis. Madrid and Spain as a whole have declared 3 days of mourning. And earlier this morning, the Almudena Cathedral right behind me, its bells rang 88 times this morning, each time to mark a year in the life of Pope Francis. So there has been a real outpouring of gestures and tributes to the Pope. I mean, other cathedrals that have been making similar gestures today as well around the country. And in the political sphere, politicians of pretty much every stripe have been coming out and speaking about the Pope, paying tribute to him. The Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, who's a socialist, talked about his commitment to social justice and the most vulnerable. Other politicians talked about his commitment to migrants and also his worries about climate change.
Guy Hedgecoe, thank you. Mayeni Jones is in Johannesburg, and Africa has seen a large growth in Catholicism. The reaction there today?
Absolutely, and this is reflected in the fact that heads of state from across the continent have already started sending tributes to Pope Francis. The African Union says his voice carried moral clarity at a time when the world is becoming increasingly fractured. Pope Francis on the continent was seen as somebody who was deeply interested and advocating for some of the world's forgotten conflicts. Even just yesterday during his Easter message, he called for peace in Sudan, South Sudan, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. That's a country that he visited in 2023, one of his last international trips. He also went to South Sudan, and many Africans see him as somebody who wasn't only willing to talk about peace in those places, but also willing to physically put himself there in order to show solidarity with the peoples of Africa. There's also been a lot of admiration for his stance on migration, his constant reminders because of the human rights of migrants and the importance of preserving them. He will be mourned by the 281 million Africans who are believed to be Catholics, most of them in the Democratic Republic of Congo, but others right across the continent.
Mayeni, thank you. And finally, let's go to our Europe editor, Katya Adler, who is in Brussels. Katya.
Well, Sophie, I'm outside the largest Catholic cathedral in Brussels. Although church attendance across Europe has been dwindling over the years, Western Europe is still really marked by strong Catholic tradition. If we look to France tonight, the famous Eiffel Tower, known for its twinkling lights at night, will be in darkness as a sign of respect and mourning for Pope Francis. Emmanuel Macron, the President of France, was one of the first to express his condolences today. We've heard from Friedrich Merz, the Chancellor of Germany, Europe's largest country. He said Pope Francis was a man of humility, on the side of those marginalised and also seeking for peace and justice. He was not a pope without his controversies. He was criticised for not chasing perpetrators of sexual abuse enough inside the Catholic Church, for example, but widely he was seen as a man of peace, and he used his last speech as pontiff during the Easter ceremonies this weekend, in fact, to call for a long and lasting peace in Ukraine.
Katya Adler, Mayeni Jones, Guy Hedgecoe and Yolande Nell, thank you all. Well, the following days will see a formal process for Catholics around the world to say farewell to the Pope before cardinals arrive in the Vatican to decide on his successor. But Pope Francis had already chosen to change some of those traditions, as Mark Easton now reports.
The Pope's office and apartments have been sealed. The papal fisherman's ring has been removed from Pope Francis's finger and smashed with a hammer. His body, dressed in red robes, will lie in state for 3 days at St. Peter's Basilica. Ritual dictates almost every detail of a pope's death. But Pope Francis was a man with his own ideas. He is elected not to be buried in the Vatican like most of his predecessors, but in the Basilica of St. Mary Major, where he often chose to pray. It's in one of Rome's less glamorous neighbourhoods, Esquilino, home to budget hotels and modest B&Bs, close to the main bus and railway stations, the district where many immigrants have put down roots. Unlike the grand and traditional papal funeral afforded to Pope Benedict in 2023, Francis has designed a much humbler service. Rather than the grand 3-layered papal coffin, his will be a simple wooden casket. The funeral will take place within a week, amid 9 days of official mourning. The conclave to elect his successor won't begin for at least 15 days. 138 cardinals under 80 are eligible to vote. Pope Francis's appointments have ensured it's a much less European constituency than before, with 18 South American and 18 African cardinals among those who must decide upon the direction of the Catholic Church.
Mark is with me now. It is a historic process and a very complicated one as well.
It is complicated. As we were discussing earlier, anyone who's seen the film Conclave will know it can be very convoluted, very political, a lot of machinations. But the point here, I think, is that the death of a pope marks the end of a chapter in the story of the Catholic Church. And the new pope, whoever it will be a man, will write their own new chapter. They can take the institution in a new direction. But what Pope Francis was clearly determined to do, and you can see it in so many of the traditions and things that he challenged during his time as Pope, he wanted to ensure that his legacy would remain, that the Church could actually see itself as a global institution, reflecting the demands of a population right across the planet, a diverse population. And that perhaps will be his true legacy.
Mark, thank you. Well, in the last few minutes, President Trump has paid his respects, writing on Truth Social, "Rest in peace, Pope Francis. May God bless him and all who loved him." And more tributes have come in from around the world. Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, said the Pope was a great man, a great shepherd. She said she had the privilege of enjoying his friendship, his advice, his teachings. Russia's Vladimir Putin expressed condolences to the Vatican and said, "In this sad hour, I would like to convey to you and the entire Catholic clergy my words of sympathy and support." India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi said the Pope would be remembered as a beacon of compassion, humility and spiritual courage by millions across the world. And the Dutch Prime Minister said with his sober way of life, acts of service and compassion, Pope Francis was a role model for many. Well, political and religious leaders across the UK have been paying tribute following the death of Pope Francis. Northern Ireland's First Minister said Catholics in Ireland and across the world will feel his loss deeply. Our Ireland correspondent Chris Page is in Armagh. He joins us now. Chris.
Yes, Sophie, this city is regarded by people across the island of Ireland as their ancient spiritual capital. And here at St Patrick's Cathedral, the Archbishop of Armagh, the leader of the Catholic Church in Ireland, Eamon Martin, has paid tribute to his leader, saying that Pope Francis had shown immense courage and serenity in the face of frailty and suffering. And in Belfast, parishioners arrived for Easter Monday Mass this morning, just as word of the Pope's passing was spreading.
We'd watched him yesterday on the news and we'd watched him in the Pope Mobile, and he made a big effort to go out and talk to the people, and I thought he was recovering, so very shocked and very sad.
I heard it on the radio, terrible, sad, and there he was out yesterday through all the crowds, blessing me children and everything. It was beautiful. So it's sad that he was sick. He was sick.
He was a great inspiration. I found him a great, just quiet inspiration and an ordinary man. So, Lord rest him.
Well, several decades ago, the Catholic Church held a very powerful position, particularly in the Republic of Ireland, but its moral authority has declined in recent years, not least because of scandals involving child abuse and the mistreatment of women in institutions for unmarried mothers. And when Pope Francis became only the second Pope ever to visit Ireland 7 years ago, he, at a Mass in Dublin, issued an apology and a plea for forgiveness, and that has been reflected upon today by the Irish Prime Minister, the Taoiseach Micheál Martin, who said the Catholic Church has lost an exceptional leader. Here in Northern Ireland, there'll be plenty of attention on political responses to news of Francis's death, given the history of sectarian division between Protestants and Catholic. The First Minister, Michelle O'Neill of the Irish Nationalist Party Sinn Féin, has said the Pope spoke passionately in support of the peace process, and the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party, Gavin Robinson, has offered notably warmer words than any of his predecessors on the passing of a Pope. He said Pope Francis was gentle, humble and caring.
Chris, thank you. Masses for Pope Francis are expected to be held in Catholic cathedrals right across the United Kingdom today. Well, Sam Harrison is at Westminster Cathedral in central London, and a Mass is going to be held there later this afternoon.
That's right, Sophie. Westminster Cathedral is the largest Catholic church in England and Wales, representing a religion which it represents millions of people. And a steady flow of people have been making their way through the doors behind me as this mourning has gone on. There have been several services taking place here. Worth noting that those services were always part of the Easter schedule. They have, of course, got much busier since the news broke of Pope Francis's death. It's been a busy morning here. People have been gathering from across the world. This afternoon, the schedule is set to get busier as well. At 5:30, something called a Requiem Mass will take place here. That gives the congregation a chance to come and pay their respects to Pope Francis, to pray for the Pope's soul. So things set to get busier here this afternoon, but we have been speaking to mourners who have travelled from across the world to be here in London and who have come to this famous church today.
Thank you very much, Sam. Our Scotland correspondent David Wallace-Lockhart is in Glasgow, and tributes being paid there to the Pope as well today.
That's right. Around 13% of Scotland, around 700,000 people, are Catholic, and many members of the Catholic community are attending Easter Monday Mass like this one going on at St Andrew's Cathedral in Glasgow, which has become an opportunity to pay tribute to the Pope. There's sadness, there's surprise, even though it was well known he had his health issues, and genuine fondness is clear for Pope Francis. And of course, there's been tribute paid by the Catholic Church in Scotland. The Archbishop of St Andrews in Edinburgh, Leo Cushley, said he was deeply saddened by the news that Pope Francis had always sought to achieve unity. The Bishop of Paisley, John Keenan, spoke about a time where all the Scottish bishops had an audience with Pope Francis. It was informal, it was relaxed. At the end, they presented him with a bottle of malt whisky, which he referred to as holy water. There's also been political reaction to the flags at Holyrood. The Scottish Parliament in Edinburgh are being flown at half-mast, and John Swinney, the First Minister, has paid tribute. He's someone who himself attends Catholic Church regularly with family members. He talked about heartbreak in that community as he paid tribute to Pope Francis.
I know the Catholic community will feel his loss very acutely, but I think the loss of the Catholic community will also be reflected in the loss of other communities in Scotland and around the world who valued the principled spiritual leadership of Pope Francis, which has been always undertaken to make the world a better place, and we're profoundly grateful to him for that.
Now, Pope Francis never made it to Scotland. He was expected to come to the COP Climate Summit back in 2021, but health reasons prevented him from travelling. Despite that, though, clear that as a spiritual leader, he touched the lives of many people in Scotland.
David, thank you. Well, let's go to Wales now. Sarah Daffith is in Cardiff, outside the city's cathedral. Sarah.
Yes, Sophie, I'm outside the Metropolitan Cathedral Church of St David in Cardiff, where crowds of people have filed in for a mass service to celebrate the life of Pope Francis. And this cathedral, like many across Wales, will be open until 10 o'clock this evening, and a book of condolences has been left out for anyone wanting to pay their respects. Now, ahead of the service, I spoke to the Archbishop of Cardiff Maneaver, Mark O'Toole, who said that this cathedral is open to anyone, whether you're Catholic or not, if you want a quiet moment of worship or to light a candle, something many have done today and will continue to do so. And among other tributes here from Wales, the First Minister, Eluned Morgan, said that on behalf of the Welsh Government and as a Christian, she offers her deepest condolences to the Catholic community here in Wales and across the world, saying that in his final months, Pope Francis spoke with moral clarity, and his legacy will endure in the lives he touched and the values that he championed, saying that the values will continue to inspire us here in Wales. Sophie.
Sarah, thank you. And just to say, a special programme, Pope Francis, the People's Pope, will be available on the iPlayer shortly and will also be shown at 9 p.m. tonight on BBC One. We can take a brief look now at some other news today. And Ukraine's military has reported Russian drone attacks on several regions overnight, just hours after the end of an Easter truce declared by Moscow. It follows a rare day when there have been no air alerts in Ukraine, but fighting had continued on parts of the front line, with both sides accusing the other of thousands of breaches. The Prison Officers Association is urging the government to arm staff at some of Britain's highest security jails with tasers. There are renewed safety concerns following an attack on 3 officers at Franklin Prison by the brother of the Manchester Arena bombing. China has warned it will hit back at countries making deals with the US that hurt Beijing's interests. The comments follow reports that the US plans to pressure governments to restrict trade with China. Let's have a look at the latest weather now. Ben Rich is here to tell us all. Hello.
Hi, Sophie. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Rain features in the forecast for most of us this Easter Monday. We've got a band of cloud and outbreaks of rain pushing northwards and eastwards in association with a weather front. You can see the extent of the rain on the recent radar picture. Ahead of that, the northeast of Scotland seeing some spells of sunshine, although even here it'll tend to cloud over with a little bit of rain later on. And behind our weather front for Northern Ireland, for Wales, for the southwest, yes, we see some sunshine, but also a scattering of heavy and possibly thundery showers. Temperatures 11 to 17 degrees. Now, through this evening and tonight, our band of cloud and rain will linger across the northeast of Scotland. But elsewhere, the skies will tend to clear. We'll see some patches of cloud around some western hills, might turn a little bit misty in places, and a slightly chilly night for some, particularly in Northern Ireland, where 1 or two locations might get quite close to freezing. So we head into tomorrow. Our weather front still sitting across the far northeast of Scotland, and then another area of low pressure swinging in from the west. So some cloud and rain to start off across the Northern Isles, then some spells of sunshine and a scattering of showers, and then as our area of low pressure swirls in, it will turn quite breezy and it will also turn wet across Northern Ireland, perhaps the far west of Wales, the far southwest of England by the end of the afternoon. Temperature-wise, 13 in Aberdeen, 18 in London, so it will feel warm in any sunshine. That area of low pressure will move across the southern half of the UK during Tuesday night. It will tend to clear on Wednesday. High pressure starts to build from the north, so that means actually a decent amount of dry weather as we head towards the end of the week. A little bit chilly for some eastern coast, maybe some rain at times. But yes, a lot of dry weather, some spells of sunshine for the end of the week, Sophie.
Thank you. And that's it from us. The news where you are is coming up next, but we will leave you now with these images of the Pope, who has died at the age of 88. Goodbye.
Fratelli e sorelle, buonasera.
Cari fratelli e sorelle, buona Pasqua.